both parties become so enmeshed, and you deal with the enmeshment differently. One person's going to be controlling and try to manipulate the other person, and the other person's going to try and latch onto them by taking care of them and being that sort of stable pillar in their life.
Hello, hello.
How are you?
I'm in distress.
Oh, this is okay. Good to hear.
Oh, well, that's a terrible reaction.
I mean, sad to hear. I apologize. I'm really worried about you.
Jesus Christ. No, I'm in distress because, as you may see, I have a naked wall behind me. So, generally speaking, and for those who watch us and don't listen to us, and don't just listen, rather, I normally have a big ass neon sign of our logo hanging up behind me. What you all probably don't know is that this is not just purely a podcast space that I have here in my house. This is actually my wife's office because she works from home 100%. So I commandeer her office to tape this show. And because not everyone that she works with wants to see a big giant neon brain behind them, I kind of take that sign up and down before we record each time. And it's a big sign, as we talked about when I first got it, a little bit bigger than I imagined it would be.
Yeah, it's
substantial. Yeah. And so I was trying to take it down, or trying to put it up, and it cracked. So there's a little crack. I'm looking at it over here. I'll need to fix it before I put it up so it doesn't just break into two. So
I am sure that our audience is shocked at the idea that the guy that had to hang it like 7 times before he could get it straight, that you somehow in your hanging it and taking it down didn't follow best practices.
Yeah, I have nothing to defend myself against there. And if I could show you the wall, so I put in, those there's these little hooks that you just go in. So if you're not hanging anything heavy into just studs, you're hanging a drywall, there's these hooks that are supposed to help, but these hooks have made gigantic gashes in the drywall behind me. So I'm 0 for 2 as it relates to hanging crap on a wall in preparation for the show. Yes.
Yeah.
So,
and I'm sure that those little hooky thingies, I'm sure that there's got to be some general contractor listening to us going like, oh dear God.
Yeah. No, do not reach out to either of us if you have carpentry or other handyman type questions. I feel like we've probably demonstrated that indirectly over the past 25 or so episodes, and now we're stating it outright.
Well, I think speak for yourself, because you'll notice everything is hung straight behind me.
Yes, Dave. And you did that.
Wait, I didn't.
Did you do that?
I did that. Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Now, if you were closer, I do a lot of things to avoid having to have them actually be straight. Like, instead of, if it ever requires 2 holes, I just put one, and that way I can go back and, balance it.
Oh yeah, for sure.
That's my strategy.
No, yeah, it's certainly a better strategy than those friggin' picture frames where you have to get like it has to be perfect because there's 2 holes. I can't do that.
Yeah, I can't do it either. I'm trying to think of how to transition from your errors in construction work to the topic of today. We have a more serious topic today, and I'm trying to think. So I think
I don't think there is a transition.
Maybe a clunky transition here. We're going to talk about Gabby Petito. Let me tell you so you know about Gabby Petito. You know about the case.
Yeah, I know about it. This is actually one of the times where you and I prepped a bit more than just 24 hours beforehand. So I am aware of the Gabby Petito case. I was not as aware of it last week, but yeah, saw a dash cam video, did some reading up on it. Yeah.
So there's a new Netflix documentary. So this case happened, I think, like 2.5 years ago, something like that.
Yeah, 2021.
2021. Oh, geez, longer. So Gabby Petito goes with her boyfriend, Brian Laundrie, on a road trip. And he ends up killing her, leaving her body in the Teton National Park, comes back, hides out with his parents for a little bit, then goes into the Everglades and kills himself. It's a horrific story. And it got a lot of public attention because Gabby was missing for a long time and no one could locate her. which was so I think had more eyes on this case of this guy who they started off in this relationship that seemed really good, and then it transitioned to him killing her. And it's like, how does this happen where this guy who off the bat sort of seems good transitions into this a really abusive figure? So that's what I wanted to talk about today. I want to talk about abuse. I want to talk about how do you create somebody like Brian Laundrie? What is the psychology behind someone who is abusive? And I'm gonna start with my final view, and we'll see if you agree with it. But like, if you ahead of this, you said, well, what's the goal? And I think the goal is to have people better understand the journey of someone who becomes abusive, so that people can better clock abuse and avoid abuse.
Yeah.
Okay.
That makes sense. And maybe this is a place to start, but I'll acknowledge this is not my area of expertise as a psychologist. And so I, when watching that video and just looking at this guy, the picture I have in my head of someone is, I could probably tell at least a little bit what someone who's going to do that, what they look like, and how they behave. And if I did not know the ultimate outcome of all this, and I just watching that dash cam video, I mean, all right, my antenna may have gone a little bit because of the nature of what was going on. You have someone who's very upset and Gabby in the car, but he did not strike me as someone who would be a stereotype, at least, of someone who would do that.
Yeah, one of my very first pop psych YouTube videos was about this case.
Oh yeah,
and I had just seen the dash cam footage and all this, like, whenever anything like this happens, every psychologist, any kind of professional comes out and they go, oh, I could have seen it a mile away. Here's all the reasons why. And I came out with saying, like, look, just watching the dash cam footage, I would have had no idea.
Yeah.
I didn't blame the police. I said, like, this is really hard to judge. And then I watched the Netflix special, and we got more dash cam footage, and we had more time on the cops, which I'll complain about in a second. I'm going to derail and just yell at them because I find it so problematic. And we get the call into the cops where they say, I saw this guy hitting this woman. So I did not know that. And so I think
I didn't know that either.
There are things in this case. So the reason why they pulled them over originally, per the Netflix documentary, is people saw Brian hitting Gabby or slapping Gabby in Moab. So they
like while they were camping or hiking,
they're like by the side of the road arguing.
Oh, okay.
So the cops pull them over. And so like, in my mind, you go, hey, if you're a police officer and this guy has hit this woman, it feels like there should be a protocol where we handle this.
Yeah.
That's not what the cops did. So they go out and then they go and talk. And then that's sort of like smash cut to the dash cam footage that we see, which is where, Gabby looks like she's very distressed.
Yeah.
Blaming herself, as victims do, blaming herself. And Brian looks like he's, very relaxed and would never put his hand on somebody. Right. And then I watched the documentary and they show more time with the cops. And there's a part of the cops make the horrific decision not to separate them and put them into separate hotels. It's, hey, 110-pound woman, you go camp by yourself, and I'm going to put the man in a hotel, which is a wild decision. So of course they don't, and they get back together and they head to the Grand Tetons. But when they are giving the car back to Brian, or getting Brian out of the car, they're like, Brian and the cop are talking about their favorite kind of music, and the cop is saying, yeah, my wife is the same way. She just needs a shower to calm down when she gets really stressed. And it's like they're broing out about how, women can be women, and this is
women are too emotional. Yeah.
Yes. So that was it was a very, in my mind, a very clear example of how there has to be a system in place. Like we cannot blame the cops for not reading that. I blame the guy that's talking about music choices with Brian that was broing out with him, but
like just trying to connect with him informally.
Well, they get in the
Like,
car and
what were they at?
Brian goes, you like, I think it was like, you like Megadeth, the band? And the cop's like, yeah. And Brian's like, you just hang out here and, listen to music all day. And the cop's like, oh yeah, man. Like we just hang out. It was just it was overly relaxed, I thought, when the guy just hit this woman. I mean, maybe he was trying to bond with him, but it did not read the way I wanted it to.
Yeah.
Um,
I like your point specifically around just the training of
mhm,
the police officers to be able to do some of this,
mhm,
um, especially if they got a call specifically for that. I don't
yeah,
know. Again, you and I don't have guests on. This would be a great time to have a guest who either is a cop, was a cop, or is someone who
mhm,
works in the criminal justice system
mhm,
to better understand some of this. But it seems like there's so many examples, particularly over the past decade, where it's like, all right, well, the cops are called in to do this, but they have very little training to
mhm,
actually do the thing that they're asked to do.
mhm.
And so
And
what
I
do we
think, yeah.
expect?
Well, I think, yeah, it's like, what do you expect? And I guess what I do expect, or what feels like an easy solution to me would be they should both be taken into the station, and there should be a victim's advocate
Yeah.
there. Or there's like, you know what I mean? Like I wouldn't roadside be able to assess whether or not Brian's abusive, but I could go, okay, let's separate you two. Let's have Gabby feel safe and talk to someone who a social worker. And I
Uh-huh.
bet you find out a lot more than if you're on the side of the highway trying to close up work for the day. So it just felt
Yep.
like rushed, and so then bad decisions were made,
That
you know?
again, that makes complete sense.
Yeah.
And um, I think what you're honing in on there is acknowledging what you know and what you don't know. And when you don't know something, then how do you bring in someone who does?
Right. Yeah, be
And I
willing to
feel like,
do that.
yeah, and there's so many parts of people's jobs that where that doesn't happen, where it's like, yeah, to your point, it's I'm tired, it's the end of the day, or I got it, or I've seen something like this before and it was fine, as
Mhm,
opposed to taking that step back and say, well, I don't know what to do here.
mhm,
There's some
mhm,
question marks in my head.
mhm,
So I should go find someone who does.
mhm. It's a horrible situation.
Yep.
So I wanted to talk with you about how abusers are created. Like, how do you end up with a Brian Laundrie?
Right.
When I say that, what do you think? Are there things that you have in your mind that sort of are triggers for abusive behavior?
Yeah.
How would you describe that mechanism?
Triggers for like how does someone become an abuser? Is that what
Yeah.
you're asking? Yeah.
So not what makes them abuse, but what's the origin story of an abuser?
I mean, a high level thoughts there would be someone who's experienced something like that when they were growing up or in their past.
Mhm,
So, right, we
mhm,
tend to repeat things that we observe
mhm,
growing up. Um, some of it tends to be, I think, just this desire to control. So, I'd imagine that part of what can cause someone to be abusive is a perceived lack of control of other parts of their life where they feel like this is someone that they can control, and then when they find out that maybe they can't in the way that they want it moves from maybe more of that emotional control to actual physical control.
mhm, mhm.
That's the two things that come to my mind most.
Yeah.
What about you?
So I looked it up, like, what are all the different ways that there's a lot of research onto the origin story of an
Hmm.
abuser. And I think there's a lot of nuance in the way we describe things,
Sure.
but in general, it feels like there's just a couple of buckets. So one bucket is you have been a victim in some way. And you being victim means that you see the behavior, you learn the behavior. And whether or not you were, you saw abuse to somebody else, or you yourself was abused,
Hmm.
but there's some kind of traumatic event and you learned from it.
Hmm.
And but tied to that traumatic event, you also then can develop personality characteristics, narcissism, antisocial personality disorder,
Hmm.
that put you at risk for not being as concerned with the experiences of others and overly concerned with your experience. So you have
Hmm.
sort of this, I've learned this thing, I've seen it. So it's sort of okay in my world. And also I don't care about other people
Yeah.
because of how I was raised. And now I enjoy the last step is, and now I enjoy, or I feel empowered by
Hmm.
controlling other people.
Mhm.
I would say that's like one track.
Yep.
Another track is the same sort of starting point. For whatever reason, I am raised in an environment where I don't feel good about myself. I'm raised in an environment where I don't learn how to control my emotions.
Mhm.
And because I don't feel good about myself and I can't control my emotions, I engage in behaviors that I don't like. Right.
Yeah.
So you have the narcissistic, antisocial track where it's a little bit like this vicious, intentional. I'm looking forward, maybe not looking forward to, but I am comfortable with abusing.
It's like, is the term repetition compulsion? I think that's like a clinical term where you repeat the things that were negative experiences for you at some point in your
Yes.
life, but then you end up doing them again.
Yes. Yes.
Like if your parent was an alcoholic, then sometimes even though you had a terrible upbringing, then you become an alcoholic as a way to manage that, or it just
Right.
the process or whatever
Yeah.
repeats. Yeah.
I think it's interesting when you think about that. So whatever it is, so let's just call it, if it's about drinking, where you end up duplicating the behavior that you went through, from a psychological standpoint, the explanation can be different. So for example, if I was abused, I might abuse somebody else because I want to minimize how bad that thing was.
Yeah.
Oh, they did it, I did it, no big deal. I might want to duplicate it because I feel like that's what other people in my
Yep.
shoes deserve. I might want to
Mhm.
do it because it makes me feel powerful, like my dad was when he did it to me. There could be
Yep.
a whole range of reasons,
Right.
but it comes from a very dysfunctional
Yeah.
place.
Yeah.
I sort of think about, when I was looking at the research, I sort of think about it like there's a fork in the road in abusers, where there's one side, which is I lean into this, I'm okay with abusing.
Yep.
There's the other fork in the road, which is I am not okay with this, and I'm ashamed of myself for doing that thing. So I might have a low self-esteem. I might have been mistreated. I might not be able. I've never was taught how to control my behavior, but I want to be a good person. I want to be a good
Mhm.
boyfriend, but I'm really, really insecure.
Yeah.
And your behavior, my partner's behavior, triggers that insecurity, and I can't control myself.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying? So it's like, I think that's a really important distinction. There's like that fork in the road is very important, because my sense is that more people fall into the I didn't want to be an abuser bucket. Do you agree with
Right.
that, or do you think I have that wrong? As far as like, if you had to guess, do you think more people are comfortable with it or uncomfortable with it?
I think part of my surprise with looking at I'm brain farting,
Mhm,
Brian Laundrie.
mhm.
Okay. And seeing him as someone who abused Gabby was that, yeah, he didn't fit the role, because I think my stereotype is more the former of what you were saying than
Yeah,
the latter.
yeah.
It's more of someone who, for whatever reason, operates that way and then looks, right, is a bit more outwardly aggressive,
Mhm,
is a bit more kind of lacking that emotional control, that ability to connect with someone like a cop like that. He's going to be a bit more like,
mhm,
don't like, get out of here. Everything's fine. Like, don't, so I guess that's what my stereotype is of someone who does this. And so I don't, obviously, I don't know if that's true or not, but it could be certainly that those other types that are more unsatisfied with themselves and don't necessarily want to do this, but have some sort of compulsion to do otherwise
mhm,
is more
mhm.
frequent.
Yeah. I think, I don't know that for a fact, but I think so. And I guess I would say, I think we have, as like a society, we have a tendency to want to oversimplify
Yeah.
and vilify people. Like, it's easier for us to say abusers are bad and they're all bad, and then to think bad people are abusers, and then I don't have to worry about it. But I think the reality is that there's much more of a continuum where you have to worry about a lot more than just the guy that's excited
Yeah.
to be abusive.
Right. Which is, yeah, that has to be, I think it does make sense to me that that is a smaller percentage of the population of
Mhm,
people who do this.
mhm,
And I like your point. Like so many things we've talked about on this show, it is the nuance that is oftentimes more interesting to talk about,
mhm,
because it does help better understand why whatever we're talking about, whatever phenomenon it is,
mhm.
happens
Yeah,
in a way
yeah.
that I think now is more interesting, but also can help hopefully people better understand
Yeah.
whatever they're observing or whatever they're doing.
Yeah. I was thinking in preparation for this, like, how do I make this argument? And I think one of the things we can look at is, there's different types of abuse. There's physical abuse, which I think people have a lot of clarity around what that is. But then
Right.
you also have psychological or emotional abuse.
And I'd imagine,
Mhm.
just jumping in, like there's an order of operations
Uh-huh.
here. Like I would imagine that the psychological and verbal abuse usually comes before the physical side of things. Do you know if that's true or not?
Oh,
That
I
would be
don't
my guess.
intuitively, I would say yes.
Yeah.
I thought you were gonna say there was an order of, like, significance, and I think I was not gonna agree with that. I think the
Yeah.
psychological abuse can be
Right.
very, very
Yeah.
damaging,
Yeah.
but I don't know if does it progress to physical
Hmm.
versus, you know yeah, I would assume that that's probably right.
Yeah. At least it could happen more frequently, and it may be more difficult to understand or know the prevalence
Mhm,
of verbal and psychological as opposed to physical.
mhm,
So I
mhm.
imagine if it turns physical, you are a lot more likely to get the police or the law involved.
Yeah,
Whereas it's probably a lot hazier if it's psychological or if it's just psychological or verbal.
right. So I think let's think about it like just the psychological abuse, because it's vague.
Yeah.
I am sure that if you followed me around in my interactions with Allison, there would be moments where you would go like, "Hey man, that's pretty manipulative what you just said." Right? And I would go, if you asked me, "David, do you abuse?" I would say, I'm miles from being abusive."
Right. Right.
But I am sure that there are moments when I talk to her or when I am sharp or I maneuver or I whatever, and I'm unintentionally being a little bit controlling or I'm unintentionally making her feel like her emotions aren't as reasonable. Like that
Right.
is like my default strategy when we're fighting is to be like, you're gonna be upset. The dishes again. You're upset about the dishes again. You know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
I can get myself in that place, and if you step back and go, okay, well, like, what's the mechanism behind why I would do that? I love her. I would never want to hurt her. Why do I go, come on, you're going to complain. That complaint that you have is unreasonable. And I think it is because I'm trying to control the situation
Sure.
because I don't like the where it's going. And I think that that's probably the sort of the trigger for most of it is, low level is I don't want to have a fight with her. And so instead of just apologizing, I would rather be like, what you're saying is really ridiculous. That emotion is totally unreasonable.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I think that progresses. That's the same mechanism for physical abuse. If
Yeah.
you're Brian Laundrie or someone who's physically abusive, I think frequently it is, I'm very insecure with who I am and in our relationship, and I'm worried about you doing X, Y, or Z. So I'm going to consequence you. I'm going to react to you. I'm going to try and stop. I'm going to try and control you in a very aggressive way. Do you know what I'm
Right.
saying? But I think when we conceptualize, it's really the same mechanism.
Right. I mean, yeah, you're just at the kind of the bottom layer, and then there are certain people who kind of just move up that ladder, so to speak,
Yes.
into increasingly aggressive and negative,
Hmm.
outcomes.
Hmm.
As you're saying that, talking about you and Allison, I'm trying to think of, well, what happens to me if like me and my wife disagree, and why I find myself oftentimes I'll ask rhetorical questions that are not rhetorical.
Uh-huh.
I'll say something like this happened recently. Well, I'll say, well, we didn't do this thing. What I mean is like, well, I thought you were going to do that thing. Well, I guess we need to
Oh
do
yeah.
it better.
Yeah.
And it's like, I think when I say that, I'm more just upset about the situation that we find ourselves in.
Yes.
And instead of saying, well, gosh, I wonder what I could have done here, it's
Hmm.
in the moment in particular, I'm just like, ugh, why didn't we think of this?
Hmm.
And I don't want to take responsibility for it.
Hmm.
So then I said, well, why didn't we do this?
Hmm.
Why doesn't she have this medicine? And yeah, that's not helpful either, because then it's like, well, I don't know. It's not necessarily my fault that she doesn't have it. So
Yeah.
Are you blaming me for not doing this thing that we didn't discuss that one of us would do? Yeah, I guess kind of.
Yeah. Now, do you feel bad for that behavior?
Yes, it feels great in the moment, and then usually about 5 to 10 minutes later, when I have my faculties about me again,
Yeah.
like, well, that was kind of shitty.
Yeah.
Then I have to,
So I
go
think,
back and say
yes, I think that
that's
that's, I
not great.
mean, that is sort of like the cycle of violence,
Hmm.
right? There is tension that if I was going to imagine we were drawing the cycle, you start off with, there's this tension and we're like, I'm annoyed, I'm frustrated. Then there's some kind of really negative thing that happens. And, if it's physical violence or
Right.
in my case, I say, are you complaining about the dishes again?
Yeah.
But then we have the fight. And then afterwards I go, I'm sorry, shouldn't have done that. There's like the regret. Then there's the love bombing. I love you. No matter, we're in this together. Right.
Yeah.
Then there's a lull. And then eventually she yells at me about the dishes again. And right. So it happens, I think, everywhere.
Sure.
And, the question is, well, what's the line where it becomes abusive? And I
Hmm.
keep sort of going back to that because I want to make the point that even somebody like Brian Laundrie starts off at a place where it's coming from insecurity. It's coming from a need to control the situation. It's coming from a sort of an inability to control his own emotions, right? Like you said, when you lash out that way, or when I lash out that way, what I'm doing is sort of, I've lost the ability to be objective and I'm doing whatever I can to control the situation,
Yep. Yep.
and then it spills over. And then there's the love bombings, all the things that Brian Laundrie was doing.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, I've not thought about it that way, but yeah, that makes a ton of sense.
Mm-hmm. But so here's the thing that I think is, I guess, really important about it. And again, we're just talking about like the regret track, is because we don't think about it that way, because we don't normalize it that way. I think we just bucket like everybody that's abusive is an absolute monster.
Yeah.
And so I wonder, like I've had clients before who are in relationships that I feel are totally abusive. And whether or not it's physical, I will be like, that is not a healthy relationship that you are in. But they'll say, he's a good guy, cares for the kids, cares for me. Yeah, he cusses at me, and yeah, he minimizes me, and yeah, he controls me. But he's a good guy. And I think that we struggle to clock it as abuse because it doesn't fit the archetype that we've created for the villain that is the abuser.
Yeah. Right. And it's not understanding the dynamic between those two individuals, and then not also understanding the person who is abused and their mental state probably as well. I remember learning in college, and I'm not going to get the terms correctly. Maybe you can help me here, but it's almost like in romantic relationships, there's like this, what's the term? I'll use like sunk cost. Like,
Yeah.
you're into a relationship so long that even though there's not a lot
Yeah, yeah, there's a
not to
term.
like, there's even more that just keeps you there.
Mhm. Mhm.
And sometimes, and I think that's when people start using the term victim blame. Like, how are you blaming this person? Because from the outside, someone's terrible to you, leave.
Mhm. Right.
And it seems that easy.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
of course, again, this is where the nuance comes into play. It's rarely that cut and dry. Nothing in life is,
Mm-mm.
including and maybe particularly these types of situations.
It's an interesting thing you hadn't until you brought that up. I was just thinking there's a lot of people on the internet that blame Gabby in that
Hmm.
in that, and I'm like, I can't even wrap my head around how you get there when it's physical abuse that way.
Yeah.
But they're looking at it going, well, she scratched him, so they're the same.
Yeah.
And I don't have a psychological takeaway other than I just really struggle with that stance. I don't understand how people get why the desire to blame the victim also, who is dead, by the way.
Right.
Why do we do that?
Well, again, I'll offer one or one and a half responses to that. So you started this conversation today saying, people want there to be easy answers to things.
Mhm. Mhm.
And it's difficult for people to have to think of everything or any type of scenario or interaction or story with all the nuance. And
Mhm.
so if you give people enough to make a quick line, one or two pieces of information, or two or three pieces of information rather, then they create a story for themselves and it's easy, and then they can move on with their day.
Yeah.
So I wanted that's part of it is just a
Yeah.
desire to know enough to make it clear and move on.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then there's well, I guess what I was going to say otherwise is pretty much the same thing. So I think it is that desire for quick, easy answers to move on, because
Yeah.
otherwise it's very anxiety provoking, I think, for people to just wonder
Mhm.
about that and then cause them to think, well, what else
Mhm.
around me? What am I not thinking of?
Mhm.
Which makes it even worse.
When I describe it that way, I was trying to, when I was thinking about this discussion, I was thinking about, okay, who are the people that I have worked with? And I've worked with people that have been, that I thought were victims or that themselves identified as victims. In every case, I have thought that would be very hard to get out. When you hear someone talk about all the ways in which they are wrapped up into the relationship, you're like,
Yeah.
I get why you can't get out. I felt so, I guess, bad for Gabby in the documentary. The abuse sort of starts progressively, where the first time it's really clear is she wants to go hang out with some friends, and Brian controls her by stealing her wallet. So she leaves the house. He's hidden the wallet. She gets halfway to the party or whatever, and has to go home because he is controlling her.
Yep.
And I think my interpretation of that is you have Brian who is very insecure, doesn't think that Gabby's going to stay with him, doesn't think that he deserves Gabby's, he's emotionally enmeshed with her and freaks out at the idea that she's going to live a life outside of him. So he's going to
Mhm.
try and control her. He hides the wallet. And when they have a fight about this, they show the text messages, and Gabby is responding to him and saying, because he's like, sorry, I did that. I shouldn't have. I was just worried about you leaving me or whatever. And her response to him is something along the lines of, I would never leave you. I never want you to feel bad. It was this, she became the nurturer,
Yep.
and I think that dynamic also can exist in
Yes.
an abusive relationship where both parties become so enmeshed, and you deal with the enmeshment differently. One person's going to be controlling and try to manipulate the other person, and the other person's going to try and latch onto them by taking care of them and being that sort of stable pillar in their life.
Potentially someone who's more likely to be a victim like that is someone who maybe her intention is just to reinforce and support and help him understand that that's not what her intention is, and then he
Mhm,
takes advantage of something like
mhm,
that.
mhm. Anything else on that? I'm trying to think of, as far as like thinking about abusers and their origin story. Anything we should have talked about there?
That answered some of the questions that I had around what are the differences between who you might suspect that would be this type of person and someone who you wouldn't.
Mhm.
I like the way that you outlined that there, so I don't have any more questions for you there.
So I think the takeaway, as it relates to that, is that we should be a lot more vigilant. And I always say this on I'm always screaming about that. We should be more vigilant about describing all the sort of levels of abuse,
Mhm.
whether it's physical or sexual or psychological, I don't care what it is,
Right.
so that we clock it earlier and do something about it. And I do think that is a problem with, I think that's the downside of the way society oversimplifies things,
Yep.
is that we aren't alarmed enough at behavior that is pointing
Right.
very clearly towards more severe abuse in the future.
Right. And I think if I'm listening to this and think, well, what am I doing? Well, if again, it can be easier because you don't want to assume the worst in people,
Mhm,
or you want to downplay something uncomfortable or negative to say, well, I doubt that that's
mhm,
actually what's happening now.
mhm, mhm,
And maybe it causes, I think this has certainly caused me and probably, or hopefully others to question, well, why discount it so quickly?
mhm.
Why
Right.
not ask and try to understand better? And if that's the case, provide some support or provides them direction to where someone like that could get some support.
Yeah.
This conversation has got me thinking about something else. It's a bit of a tangent, but you and I have talked about cult leaders before and some of the characteristics and the psychological profile of cult leaders. There seems to me to be some parallels here. While of course the object of the focus is different. You have an abusive person, the focus is on one person or maybe a family or something like that. Whereas a cult leader, the object is a group.
Yep.
But does that make sense to you? Some similarities? Do you see some similarities between these two folks or these two groups of individuals?
Yeah. I mean, I think that in both cases, the abuse and the control of an individual or the group is serving the same purpose.
Right.
You are deeply insecure or you feel very out of control. And so your solution to that is to make yourself the center of attention. Your solution to that is to control the behavior of everybody else. Like you're sort of adding stability and status to your life by controlling individuals or larger groups. I mean, I think that is it's interesting if you think about how, I would imagine, not sure if this is true for cult leaders, but I would imagine it is, that like a traumatic background, a lack of stability as a child, like it can show up in all different kinds of ways. You know what I mean? In one of the more extreme ways, but it is a response to some kind of deep injury, psychological injury.
Yeah, like you have people who, right, it's like, come follow me. So they're engaging, which I'd imagine, at least at some point there was something attractive to someone who eventually turned out to be an abusive person. There's some initial attraction there. And then, over time, like little by little, they take more control and they have more power and you have less. And that's very similar to a cult leader. So ultimately it's all you have is me.
Yeah.
And I think that's ultimately what happens in an individual abusive relationship as well. It's all you have is me.
Right.
That's just shut you out from other parts of your life.
That gives me the chills when you say that, but that I think is exactly what's happening.
Yeah.
They want it to be all you have is me.
Yeah, I've never put that together before, but there's certainly something there. Anyway.
Good. Rob, I think that we covered that in detail. Anything else?
I don't think so, Dave. Again, this was one of those instances where you asked me to watch something that I was originally hesitant to do, but I actually enjoyed our conversation today because it caused me to think of something I hadn't really thought much of before, which is, again, the detail and the nuance of why something like this happens and some things to look out for.
Yeah, good.
So nicely done.
Yeah, thank you. In the comments, let us know if you like this. Hit the like button if you like this. Leave a comment. If you want us to do a future episode on Brian Laundrie's parents, let us know in the comments below, and maybe we'll put that to the list.
Whoa, that's a good teaser. I don't know anything about his parents, and now I want to know all about his parents.
You don't know? Okay, we'll talk about his parents. There's a lot to talk about.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
All right. Well, maybe I will hit a like button and put a comment in there so I can have an excuse to talk about his parents.
Like button, subscribe, email us at shrinkspaceshow@gmail.com, and we're Shrinkspace Show wherever you on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, all the places.
That was so smoothly done.
I know. I
think everyone will know exactly where to go now.
Shrinkspace Show everywhere. See you next week.
Bye, Dave.
All right, thanks. Bye.